Wistric, you're muted.
I was muted.
Oh, welcome back.
Just a little rusty, that's all. So back in 2004, I stood on a field in Pennsylvania, and there were 300 people armed with swords across from me, and I was going to kill them all, and I was vibrating. And then the general, the warlord for the army, who was my coach, and who knew he was dealing with a human chihuahua, because 23-year-old Wistric was a human chihuahua, said, "Hey, you're my bodyguard." I wanted to go kill, but instead I had to stand there and guard him. So the first 2 runs, I guarded him until the lines broke apart, and then I died nobly defending my general. And then the 3rd time at Leon, he said, "Sick him!" And I ran across the field, threw a shot, died, and walked off the field grinning like an idiot. And I had a great time. I didn't kill anybody. I got to see the fighting from in the middle of it. I got to feel useful, and I was hooked. Being new to Rapier Melee, and being in that situation where there are 300 people across the field from you can be really intimidating if you don't know what's going on. And if you don't know what's going on, and you have no idea what you're supposed to do, it can get overwhelming to the point of discouraging. It's on the trainers, the coaches, us, pretty much anybody watching this who has interest or knowledge to keep people safe, keep people comfortable, make sure they have fun, and get them hooked so they come back. So how do we make that happen? We'll find out tonight on Fighting the World. I'm Wistric.
And I'm Bruce. And we're here to talk about new fencers tonight. And I just want to throw this out here because our outline, Wistric and I are both gamers, so we may have used the word noob. We want to throw it out there that is not derogatory. We have all been there. We have all been brand spanking new. And much like Wistric, I have my own story of someone picking me up by the scruff and going, "Let's go kill." And here I am, 10 years, 11 years. Math is hard. That many years later. And we have an excellent panel tonight. I hope my tech will bring them in so that I can introduce them. We have Mirabai, Alora, and Connor here to talk about their experiences in teaching new people, getting them hooked, and making sure that they are safe, effective, and feel fulfilled on the melee field. So I guess this opens us up to our icebreaker, which Wistric wrote, and damn it, Wistric. How was your first time on the melee field?
Oh, see, I was gonna be discreet and not.
Oh no, I'm gonna call you out.
Okay.
Welcome back to Fighting the World. It's our 1-year anniversary, and discreet's not in my vocabulary. So I'm gonna open this up to the floor, and I guess actually I'll make it easier. Mirabai, tell me about your first melee.
So my first melee was probably leading up to Penzik in 2006, but I don't really remember the war practices. I mostly just remember Penzik. And people had tried to prep me in my local group for what this was going to be like, and just nothing can really prepare you for 100+ people on either side, and everything is crazy and it's hot, and you know, things get delayed 4,000 times because other people couldn't get off the field, and you know. And I just remember being super, super excited, like Wistric was saying he was. And the cannon went off and we all went running. And then like 30 seconds later, it was over. Like everything was just a blur. Like we ran out, we stabbed some people, we got killed, we were done. And all I could think was, I want to do it again. Let's do it again. Let's do it again. And I was really fortunate because the group that I sort of grew up in Rapier was really supportive and really like, okay, we're all going to stick together and do this thing. And if you get lost, just find us, which was great. And that became part of my tactics for helping other new people was, you know, stick with your group, find a buddy that knows more than you do and stick with them.
All right. Alora, tell me about your first time on the melee field.
It was an event that I'd been at a couple of times before and had the good fortune to watch the war. And I thought that would prepare me to be in it. Not even close. Again, it was really just this energetic blur. Afterwards, it was I don't know what happened, but it was really fun and I want to do that again. I had the good fortune that, got teamed up with more experienced fighters who just sort of, come on, let's go. No, over here. And really just made it such a positive experience that really sort of paved the way to fight in war after war after war, and then to bring others in the same way.
I'm sensing a theme here, but I think we'll touch on that in a second. Hey, Connor, tell me about your first melee.
See, and here I was thinking you were going to say, tell me about your first time, but whatever. so mine's a little different because I started out as a heavy fighter. And the group that I started out with in Atlantia was a group known as Black Diamond, which is primarily a whole bunch of college kids. So for the first few Penzics I went to, probably about the first 3, it was all heavy fighting melee and things like that. And then when I started dabbling in rapier, I was the only, if you look at some of the photos from the people when we did our Black Diamond photo, I was the only rapier person out of 20 other fighters. So it was a little different for me. I didn't have a coach or anyone really pushing me along for rapier because let's just say when I first started, I was wearing patchwork armor. I looked like a cow, but I stood out because I had flashy colors. But this is also in the 90s. So when I was doing melee, there weren't that many yet.
Do you want to say it, Bruce, or do I want to say it?
No, you want to say it.
Okay, yeah. 20 years later, you were still wearing patchwork armor.
Yeah. There's a reason for that, though, because that actually became my calling card. So, and the more patches, the better. And
this is a flare.
Yeah, and I have shirts that are just patches now. But yeah.
All right, so that kind of gives us...
as far as the melee thing, it was always crazy. Say again?
Well, that gives us kind of the gambit here. So we've heard from someone who is definitely from a Penzic kingdom, and I'm going to have you guys introduce yourselves and where you're from, because I totally forgot. It's not like we have been doing this for a year. But we have the gambit. We have
it's not like we have a template that we follow for all of the...
I'm sorry. Long week. All right. We have the gambit from a Penzic kingdom to out west to Gulf Wars / former heavy fighter with a baronial name drop in there. So how about you guys introduce yourselves now that we kind of have a little bit of background about where you started. I'm going to start in the circle again. Mirabai first, and then Alora, and then Connor, and Connor's cat, because I need to meet the kitty. So Mirabai, would you please introduce yourself and where you're from?
Sure. So I'm Mirabai. I'm from the Mid-Realm. And I started fencing in Brendoken, which is Akron, Ohio, for those of you not from the Mid-Realm. And at the time, my boyfriend at the time moved up there about 6 months before I did. And there was one guy already there who was fencing, and then he and my boyfriend were the only fencers. And then I moved up there, and then there were 3 of us, and suddenly we were a team. And we sort of slowly pulled other people in until we had this group of fighters that could go out and, be somewhat of a force on the Penzic field. So that was pretty cool. And I was really fortunate. I know a lot of female fighters and fencers have had issues with being treated differently or treated poorly when they were being trained. And I very fortunately never had that experience. We were a great team kind of from the get-go. So that was a really great way to come into it. And when I started fencing, I knew literally nothing about the structure of the kingdom. I didn't know we had 5 regions. I didn't know that we had people in charge of things. I was like, I've got my little group and we're going to go do this and it's going to be really fun. And then I left the country for 2 years and came back and got right back into rapier. And within a year, suddenly knew all this stuff about how everything worked. And I was like, I can't believe I didn't know this before. This is so cool. So that's my background. I started off as a regional XO and worked my way up to being general and loved every minute of it.
Fabulous. For those of you who have joined us before, because English is a thing that I speak, as you know, the Mid-Realm is one of the more organized kingdoms because of the need for logistics in dealing with Pennsic and some of the larger wars that we deal with. I'm going to jump over to Alora. Alora, care to introduce yourself and where you're from?
Alora from Thierry in Ontario. Started out in the SCA going to one event a year, which was a baronial level event, but it drew people from, as far away as, like a 12-hour drive, which is still within our principality, let alone our kingdom. We're kind of spread out, and the size of the war just seemed so huge. And then as I, have gone to larger events, I found out that it varies. It's, we would have sometimes like 40 people aside, which seems like so much when you're new. And then I went to Gulf Wars and went, oh, this is very different and amazing. So so I've been fortunate. I started out just playing like once a year, started hanging out with rapier fighters, decided this was super fun, and then went to a practice, which was a horrible experience, and I was this close to walking away from it all. When I encountered somebody on my way out the door who said, actually, we do another practice that's more fun if you want to come. And went to that rapier practice and just had such a great time. It was so supportive, and, kind of go from there.
That's fabulous. And I hope we can really pick your brains on some of those things that made the one practice much better than the other, especially as a newer fighter. And your experience with Gulf Wars sounds a lot like mine the first time I went. I remember being both overwhelmed and, which is where I met these two. But I'm going to jump over to Connor now. And hey, Connor, tell us a little bit about yourself.
No. I just want to be awkward. So
you only think the world knows who you are.
I don't know. I mean, I've been kind of hiding for the past few years. I grew up, I started out in Atlantia, and I pretty much stayed in Atlantia, and I think I've been doing this since the mid-90s, so I'm like really old now. Well, yeah, I feel like it. At least in this game. So I think I've been to about 20 Pennsics and about 12 Gulf Wars. I've yet to make it out to the other wars, so I'm not even sure which aspects. There's so many different stories and things like that. As far as like, and it's really hard. Well, it's really hard for me to remember what my first situations were, because everything has always been a hodgepodge and it all blurs together. And there's many nights that I really don't remember, so those blur together well too.
It's scary when I see some of myself like in your perspective, Connor, and I'm like, let's pretend I didn't hear that and think immediately back to some situations. But
no, I remember when we made you Atlantean.
I still have that tassel, by the way.
Yeah. You earned it. I just forgot who licked you. That's all.
I think it was the entire table of Atlanteans who licked my face in 6 different regions. And that's why I'm still with the SEA. That was my first Gulf Wars. So
that really does sound like my crew, yeah.
Anyway, all right, changing subjects before
I like to be clear, it was consensual.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
we let her know ahead of time before.
Okay.
that it was actually a process.
His face standing on a table in a picnic area. Yeah, it was consensual. I knew what was happening as soon as Lettius stood on the picnic table and said, "I am your sponsor," whatever it was. Anyway, changing subject before I turn completely red, because
this is all just going to go nostalgia real quick.
It probably will.
Nostalgia train. But we have a couple of questions because, as we said in the intro, we want to talk a little bit about what makes a practice good for a newer fighter and how to make Melee more accessible and less chaotic, unlike this panel. So I think the first question I have for our panelists today is, how often do you guys actually practice Melee at your local practice? And how often do you seem to have novices there? And I know that the answers are going to be really varied, just based on the geographical area we are covering this evening, and the different types of wars we have. So no right or wrong answer. If you don't have many new people, you can say that. All right, I'm going to start with Alora.
So I've been to practices at multiple places just due to moving around, but for the most part, organized practices are in Lionsgate. And because of our local baronial war, we actually did a fair number of practices with Melee. Not so much sort of end of season, fall time, but definitely come spring, it was, a case of, all right, guys, we're going to start having wars again. We all need to, get back in those habits. So a lot of times practices would be run where there'd be drills first thing. And that was great, good way to get the new people in, give them some structure, and then there would be sparring, and then sort of to end the night, we would do some Melee scenarios and Melee training. And those were always super fun, usually super chaotic, lots of laughing, but really good for giving people that introduction on, hey, so there's 8 of us at practice, and this is how chaotic it is. Imagine what it's going to be like on a big field, and we're just in a gym. So it was really a good educational tool for people, not only the new people, but other people who liked doing Melee. But of course, you only get to do it so often.
Right. All right, thank you for that insight onto your practices. I'm going to jump to Connor now about local practice. Do you guys practice Melee in your area?
First I need to know what Mirabai's dog's name is.
She's Cal.
A Cal?
I've been teaching virtually from home, and she firmly believes she needs to be the star of any Zoom call, Google Meet, anything.
That's fair. Totally get that. Mine just sleeps all the time.
And she might be right, Mirabai. She might be right.
Yeah. I mean, my students are certainly more interested in her than in me.
Everyone needs a teaching aid, right?
Supervisor. Thank you.
So Atlantia likes to pride itself on Melee. So pretty much most of the practices that we have devotes typically at least an hour to Melee sort of tactics or whatever. And then there's also the people that after practice are practicing Melee at the dinner table using the salt shakers as characters. And now if you come in this way, so we do a lot of Melee all throughout. It's one of the things that it's kind of in our blood to do Melee more than tourneys. And it's one of the things that is actually very different to how we fight versus how some of the other kingdoms fight. And even some of our rules are actually designed more with Melee in mind than how some of the other kingdoms that are more inclined with tourneys in mind. So it actually does change a lot of things. And one of the other things we have to do, especially before Gulf Wars or Pennsic, is to remind our fighters that there's going to be different rules and you have to keep these in mind, and here's how. So we tend to go through that a lot, and how it also affects a lot of things.
You guys are the reason we have to define what running means each year during the Penzic rules discussion. So
Yes.
I appreciate that there's some work on the other end too, to remind people that it might be a little different.
Yeah, we also have to explain to our guys what tip cuts are. Yeah, and why they're actually used, and how the people do it, and how to actually. We also have to teach people how to handle it when you accidentally don't realize that you've been tip cut, and someone's angry at you for it. So we have to go through the gamut. Like, we even have, here's how to handle it when you get called into marshal's court. So someone else on this panel might know a little bit about that.
That is the only reason that I've ever been called into marshal's court.
Way to tell on him, Connor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like and I did so many other things that battle worthy of being called into marshal's court, but the one that it was somebody was cutting my arm and I couldn't even see them, and
yeah,
they got upset with me.
And it's all misunderstandings, but we have to try and teach people how to actually mitigate and handle that sort of thing too.
Mm-hmm.
And that is one of the big things that we have to teach our new fighters a lot more as well. And that's something that I think is also missing from a lot of practices.
Right. No, and that makes total sense. Hey, Wistric, we have an idea for an episode. All right. Last but not least. Marshal's Court. Yes. Differences in rules, which we end up talking about a lot because we have such a variety of panelists, but maybe something a little more focused about preparing for wars and the rules. But last but not least, Mirabai, how often do you actually practice melee at your local practice? And what does the novice field tend to look like?
So it depends a lot on season, just because we are usually at a park in the summers, which makes melee much more probable. And we've been in various church basements in the winter, which makes it almost impossible to do any kind of melee, including even like fox and hounds. So in the summer, we tend to kind of keep it pretty light because there, at least in recent years, last year notwithstanding, there have been a lot of regional practices. So at our local practice, we've been trying to keep it more like, let's do fox and hounds, or let's do melee freeze tag, or let's do, some version of capture the whatever, and more like playing games. But each game focuses on particular aspects of melee combat, like situational awareness. The zombies one is really good for that, and also really fun and leads to a lot of giggles. You're giving me a confused look. Have I not shown you the zombies thing?
What is the zombie thing?
Yeah.
So everyone goes onto the field as a normal combatant. But when you're killed, you come off and you get something to indicate that you're a zombie. We have, I made sashes one year, and I don't know, we've got a bunch of stuff. When you come back as a zombie, you can only fight with a single sword, but only headshots kill you. Of course, it's been like 18 months since we've done this. And you can only move at like a staggering pace. And a lot of people like to add sound effects. It's a lot of fun. The last person who is human wins.
We've done that in Montero as well. We call it zombies and villagers.
Yeah. So that's a lot of fun. Or melee freeze tag, which is exactly what it sounds like. If you get hit, you have to freeze, and someone on your team has to come place an open hand on you and count to 5 to unfreeze you. But of course, they might get frozen while they're doing that. So the team that still has someone who's able to move around wins. But yeah, just keeping it kind of light, but sort of instilling those like, hey, this is what we're focusing on in this game, so that that's something that they can carry over to the real serious melee practices.
Serious. You're so serious.
Melee is serious business.
Super serious.
Some people are very serious about their melee.
Oh, that is so true.
Just don't look at Atlantean over there. Don't look at Atlantean.
I'm sorry. We have 2 mid-realmers in the chat too. So
Hey, Mid-Realm's known for their melee as well.
and we're super serious about it.
Well, and there are some mid-realmers who will take it super seriously and be super bitter about things. let's move on and fight again.
And since this is a Pennsic Kingdom heavy panel, Elora, is Lionsgate or some other group particularly like Melee is serious business in Antier?
Now, certainly on the heavy field, we're definitely much more of a tourney kingdom than a war kingdom. However, in Rapier, I can't really say as we take it seriously, but we do have a lot of people who enjoy Melee when it comes to Rapier, especially since we do Death from Behind. So it's really a lot about tactics and skills and, combinations of things and really making the most of people's strengths and interests, which sometimes are their strengths and sometimes are just their interests.
No,
I can't say we're serious about it, but definitely in Rapier we do a fair bit of Melee scenarios at events.
that was something that Wistric and I were both very impressed with when we did the game breaking episode about a year ago. Wow. And hearing about how Melee scenarios are not just tactics or not just war points, but you guys also focus on the fact that it's supposed to be fun, and like to build up your scenarios around that. So thank you for that insight. I kind of want to touch on that a little bit with our next question, which Mirabai also touched on with giving us a couple of games, which is standard issue show up in spar practices, which is a lot of what we see across the SCA when it comes to both Rapier and Heavy, although we are starting to see a shift towards drilling. They don't include Melee training, and those who want to spar and get really good for tournaments don't tend to be as enthusiastic about Melee training. So how do we combat that? What can we do to get people excited and interested? Mirabai, you shared a bunch of really awesome games and ways to make it fun. But I'm going to push you a little bit here. What do you do when you have those, as I lovingly call them, tourney bros, show up to your practice and don't want to participate or are less than enthusiastic to participate?
For me, it honestly depends on how many people are at the practice. Mm-hmm. If we have enough people to do Melee without them, then kind of let them do their own thing. I mean, that's one of the tricky things. And I found this really tricky when I was general is this is all volunteer. You can't make it too serious and you can't force anyone to do anything or they're not going to come back. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times if we have enough people to just go and play a really fun game, they'll hear us having a ton of fun and then they'll come join us. Which honestly is kind of a tactic I learned from teaching elementary school. When you have kids who are just not wanting to participate, you show them how awesome it is to participate, and then they're like, oh, I want to do that. The other thing is to not make the whole practice about Melee. If we have practice that goes from 6:30 to 9:30 in the summer because it doesn't get dark until after 9:30, maybe make the middle hour Melee. So they have time at the beginning to warm up and spar with their friends. They have time at the end to go do whatever. And then there's a chunk in the middle where they can come and play Melee stuff.
Okay. Yeah, no, and that is a really excellent way of putting it. It's kind of fun that humans are fundamentally the same from yay big to yay big. All right. I'm going to jump back to Elora really quick because I noticed a common theme here about having fun and laughter and what really dragged you in. So do you notice that at your practices at all? You've already mentioned that you have a lot of people out there who enjoy Melee, but you mentioned too that you have a tournament heavy kingdom. So how do you get people involved?
I think when we were really scheduling practices, our Masters of Blades did a wonderful job of taking that into account. So like I said, a lot of times it would be planned that it would be drills to start the practices, and then there would be, open sparring, and then when we would do them, then the melee would be at the end. So for those people, those few people who are really tournament focused, they would just come for the first bit, and then they would spend the end bit, usually just hanging out and visiting or packing up their stuff, or they'd be like, no, I'm not going to do that. Wait, that looks really fun. And well, a couple more fights. I'd rather get a couple more fights in before I go. All right, I'll come and join you, kind of thing. So it was always, it wasn't an obligation, but like Maribel said, if you make it enough fun, they'll usually, well, you look like you'd be better if, there was one more person, doing the scenario. So I guess I'll come and help you guys out.
Oh, that's fantastic. I'm noticing a common theme between what you and Mirabai have both said this evening. So I'm really excited to touch on that a little more later. But I'm going to jump to Connor. Connor, how do you combat tourney broism?
So one of the big things that you really have to do is you actually have to talk with and not just to or at any new fighter. But one of the other things I find to actually be able to handle it best isn't actually at the practice. It's at the dinner after practice. So I think that the conversations when you have dinner or anything after the practice is actually more important, because that's what actually builds a camaraderie also. Because when you're fighting, you're just focused on fight, and trying to figure out certain things and getting really confused. But it's usually after the fact when you are having dinner and you're talking about why you did certain things, what other things could have been done, but you get to actually just think about it and talk about it and not actually swing swords at that point. So I actually find that the things that we do after practice are actually what bring people back more often. And that actually brings people in, especially the new people. They need to know that it's more than just fighting, and it's actually the friendship. I mean, that's where most of the laughs really come from anyway, right? And it's also where you can make apologies when you accidentally stabbed him in the fingers or broke a nail, or whatever, right? So these are the things that actually fix all of those and actually helps explain it more.
No, and I think that's a common theme that Wistric and I have noticed throughout the course of us having these discussions with panelists. It's the group that drinks together that stays together, and whether that's alcoholic or soda pop at the end of the day, doesn't really matter. So
And it may be
showing where you live.
It may be survivor bias, but it does really seem like all of the people who love Melee that we've had on this, their groups went out and it hung out. It was a social club where you stab people, and we haven't really heard from people who don't have or who haven't had that sort of culture at some point.
Because you don't stick around. I mean, think historically. That's exactly what it was always about. I mean, that's why military, they spend a lot more time hanging out and talking about things. You have to build that camaraderie outside of just practice and fighting. I think the practices that only go to practice and you're done, that's pretty much it. And they don't really have that. And when you're doing melee, this is one of the major differences between single fighting and melee. Melee, you have to trust your friend. You have to trust the people next to you. You're only going to trust the people next to you if you can joke around with them, right? And if you only go to the martial arts practice, throw a few swords, learn a couple tricks, and then you leave, you barely even know the person's name. How the hell are you supposed to trust them, right? So you have to go and hang out with them and do that. The people that at Penzit Gulf Wars, we hang out on the field. We go around and to the different parties. Why do you think there's parties all the time? That's why we become friends, Yes, the fighting is good, but it's actually the parties afterwards, and that's what builds the friendships that cross multiple kingdoms. So you want to keep new fighters in, invite them to things outside of just fighting.
So those are all really great points about engaging new fighters and keeping them at your practice and getting them involved in melee in ways that isn't completely overwhelming the first time, like throwing them onto a Penzik field and going, have fun. But I want to take it down a notch and just ask for a brief answer from each of you, if you can keep it brief. But what experiences on the melee field or potentially with melee can really lead to new people being turned off from melee? And how can we, well, I'm not going to ask you how we can avoid that because that gets me longer answers. And I think we want to touch on that a little bit later. But what type of experiences turn new people off? I'm going to start with Mirabai.
I think being left to their own devices is one of the things that can turn new people off, because then they just end up feeling sort of lost and overwhelmed and like they're ineffective. Right. Not going to answer how to fix that. That's my answer. Short and sweet.
Perfect. All right, Connor, you're next.
Actually, it's a lot of the same thing. I mean, if they don't feel involved, they don't feel effective. If they just go out there, get killed, walk off, and they think they did absolutely nothing at all, it's a complete turnoff. So,
all right, and last but not least, Alora.
Definitely being included. Like I said, when I first started, the One War was the only event I went to, and because we're a large principality and a large kingdom, there were a lot of other people like myself who would show up to the event, and it was their one event that year. That's all they made it to, you know, and they would go to their local practice, and then they would have their local event with their, 20 people in their shire or whatever. And this was their one chance to get that interaction. So while, engaging people at practice is great, this was an opportunity to try and engage people that you got to see once a year, maybe twice if you were lucky. And it was really great that, you'd have your person who showed up who, standing there like, on the sidelines, obviously overwhelmed. And there was always engagement. There was always, hey, do you have a group? Can we, what are your strengths? How can we engage you? So I think not engaging people is the detriment of war, of practice, of the SCA in general. Sorry, that was a much longer answer.
No, it was absolutely fine. I apologize for my facial expressions. It's been a long week, but another cat popped up behind Connor. And if you've been on the show before, you have seen that I have cats as well. I cannot control my face. I apologize. No, that is a wonderful answer. And I think it is so important that we engage people and outside of practices, at events, etc. I know I wouldn't be as into melee as I am if it hadn't been for someone grabbing me and having a hell of a time in the woods. So I asked you to keep this brief because our next question is, what is a reasonable objective for a new person in a melee? And how do you communicate that to them without belittling them or making them feel like you're treating them like a child? That is something I have definitely run into with some of the machismo you see, especially being short female talking to often new male fighters who aren't used to seeing female martial artists. And how do you help them internalize that? So that's a lot. So I guess the broad overview is, what is a reasonable objective for a noob in melee? And I'm going to start with Connor.
It all comes back to the same thing I was saying before, is talk with, not at. So talk to the person, ask them what they feel comfortable with, and then giving them an objective that they feel comfortable with. And if you can convince them to come up with a objective that is useful for it, so they put some ideas in there and then they can say that I want to do this, then they're more than happy to do it. What we usually do to remind people that are brand new to melee is you don't always have to go for the kill. leg and leave is a perfectly valid and amazing tactic, usually better than kill. And if we let people know that to give them an objective if they get legged, or give them an objective that they feel safer doing, they have a lot more fun. I had one friend that she was relatively new to it, and I convinced her to do leg and leave. And she was keeping count with how many people she legged, and she would come dancing back after she legged like the 16th person, and she was like dancing every single time because that became her objective. So giving them objectives
Was
like
that Lily?
Not Lily. I had her do other things. But yeah, give them an objective like that. But you have to help them come up with the objective. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So I have a follow-up for you. How you talked about finding out what they're comfortable with. English, geez. How would it change if you didn't have someone who was as I'm going to say plucky as the person you had legging and leaving people? What if you had someone who was a little bit more nervous or a little bit more overwhelmed? What would be an acceptable objective for them?
Always give them 2 to 3 options, and typically the option you want them to take, make that the middle option.
Okay.
And Wistric is going to hate this one, but if they are going to be one of those people that you think is go and get themselves killed, you ask them to protect the commander, right?
Oh no! In retrospect, I totally know how I got played.
Yeah,
and it was the right move.
yeah.
But I got played.
Yeah. So give them an objective to protect someone, because people feel, even if they don't succeed, they feel effective if their person doesn't die immediately. But you talk to them.
I'm kind of mad at you because you just gave away my super secret tactic for keeping Trap from being killed in the one and done melees. So thanks.
Nah.
Damn it, Connor.
No, Trap gets himself in trouble because he goes out there and talks a lot of shit. And people know who he is and targets him.
Yeah.
And he's the only person like that.
Yeah. But then he goes against other people that talk a lot of shit, and it becomes a duel. Trap, I'm going to kill you again.
All right. Well, that is enough nostalgia shit talking because I'm sure the comments are about to explode. But I'm going to jump over to Alora next and ask, in your mind, what is a reasonable objective for a new person on the melee field? And how do you communicate that to them?
I think telling them that your goal for them is that they have fun and that they're safe. And then, like Connor said, ask them what they're interested in. When I first started playing and I had no idea, because, Estelle is the word, a lot of times the commanders would be like, okay, I need 2 volunteers to go with the flanking. I need 3 volunteers to go with the shield wall. And I need, this many volunteers for the reserve. And the reserves are going to be the guys that wait and then pounce. And gave people the opportunity to volunteer for the things that interested them the most. So when you've got your plucky adventurers, they're volunteering for the flanking running guys right at the beginning. And your more nervous people, they can be like, oh, I'm going to get put in the middle of a shield wall. That sounds nice and safe. And you can give them that sort of security where they can pick their comfort zone, but also, like Connor said, you offer them the choice that you're hoping they'll take, by sort of looking at your numbers ahead of time and going, okay, where do I want them? Okay, I'm going to say there's 2 flanking positions, and I hope he and he are going to go for it, and have that backup plan. But I think talking to them about what your hope is for them, about the fun and the safety, and then listening to them, what their interest.
No, I think that is absolutely brilliant, because knowing what people want to do and not forcing them to do the exact opposite is the easiest way to make them not feel like they're going to the dentist's office. So I love hearing that common thread and hearing that across the way. When we did our introductions, we talked a little bit about our first time in melees, and because we have such a wide variety of kingdoms here, we've had kind of a wide variety on intro to melee. So Mirabai, before I jump in and ask you this question about it being kind of a reasonable objective for a new person in melee, does that change based on the size of the melee and their introduction to melee? What are your thoughts on that?
I think it absolutely does. So, you know how if you grow up in one place, you kind of think things are like that everywhere because that's how you grew up. So I grew up in the SCA in the Mid-Realm, which has a huge population density for Scadians. Like, we have big groups everywhere. And almost nowhere do you have to travel more than 45 minutes to get to a practice. So I think that makes a huge difference for how you're introduced to melee, because almost always you will have a practice, either your local practice or a Saturday practice or something, where you can get 5 to 10 people together and do melee on a regular basis. If you come from a smaller kingdom or a kingdom with much lower population density for Scadians, you don't get that opportunity. So when you show up at the big events, at the wars at Estrella or Gulf Wars or Pennsic or wherever, it's all very new, and you haven't had a lot of that background, and you haven't had a lot of that team building with the people around you. So it makes a definite difference to how people approach melee. And my first time really seeing that with people was going to Gulf Wars, because, you know, Pennsic is mostly mid-east Ethelmark Atlantia, and all of those are high population density kingdoms. So when I went to Gulf Wars and I saw people who came from kingdoms were like, they had only ever really fenced with 3 other people because that was who lived within 2 hours of them. That was a big culture shock for me, and realizing that, you know, quote, not everybody grew up the way I grew up, and that this is a big fun event for people that they don't get on a regular basis, and how lucky I was to get that all the time.
So So I guess my next question for you is, because you've seen that wide variety, you've seen that range, and I've spoken about it here before, but the Mid-Realm is kind of a special place when it comes to our war practices versus our local practices. Does that change what a reasonable objective for a new person is, the size of the melee? Give us your insight.
I think the size of the melee and the location, whether it's a practice or a war or a big event, also makes a big difference. So the size of the melee might make a difference for how complex of an objective or how challenging of an objective I would give to a newer person, because there's fewer people to hand tasks out to. So why not give them a challenge and see what they can do? And especially if it's a smaller practice, they're most likely going to be with people that they've seen more often, so they're going to be more comfortable. And even if they mess up, well, it's just in front of their friends who will support them and tell them what they could have done differently. Whereas if it's a large event or a war, and maybe it's their first time being there, giving them something where they can buddy up with people might be more comfortable for them and might make them more likely to want to come back and do it again.
Perfect. That is exactly kind of where I wanted to touch on that. Thank you so much for your insight on that. So we're going to do a speed round real quick. And I'm going to give each of you one thing. So how would you communicate to a noob a reasonable objective for them in 3 different scenarios? So I'm going to say for Alora, how would you communicate a reasonable objective for a noob in melee if it's someone you train with on a regular basis? If you can hear me. I know you just got back.
I can just barely hear you. Sorry, can you repeat the question?
So how would you communicate to someone that you train with regularly a reasonable objective on the melee field, like a new person?
Like in regards to tactics?
Yeah. with regards to tech, like what should they be doing on the melee field? You have all the time in the world to prepare them. You are at practice.
I think the number one is don't get overwhelmed by how big it is. Also, don't forget there's more than just the person in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
God, there's double entendre in that.
I know. I'm trying not to laugh. I heard Mirabai say my first time, and I was just like, I'm 12. I'm sorry. Thank you very much, Alora. I'm going to jump now, and I'm going to say, hey, Connor, you have 10 minutes immediately before lay on. How would you communicate to a new person their objective on the melee field?
Well, first I have to know what my objective is on the melee field. And again, and what our objective as a unit or a team, right? Because every side has different objectives. So we have commanders meetings for this very reason. And we, whenever I have a new person, I need to know what they're capable of and what they want to do. And if I'm a good commander, I already know what my fighters want to do. So at that point, it's basically work with them briefly and see what sort of questions they have and make them ask questions. So lead them with questions that cause them to ask more questions and get them involved. So, and that's one of the things that we do all the time. I try not to give the answers to the people I'm teaching immediately. I try and get them to figure out the answers by asking probing questions or guided questions. And so if I'm doing the 10 minutes, lay on, do you understand what you're trying to do? Why are we doing this? Let's go do it. Do you know how to do this? Blam. Oh. So.
No, and that's perfect. That is kind of exactly what I wanted as an answer from that question. So ask leading questions, figure out what they're comfortable with, and apply it to your knowledge of what the scenario is. Beautiful. Mirabai, last but not least, speed round. You're in the middle of the woods, the field, the scenario. Shit's happening all around you, and there is a doe-eyed, scared-looking noob. How do you communicate an objective to them to let them feel most effective on the melee field?
Clarification, am I general that this is happening with?
No, you are a normal human being.
Okay, then I would
you get to
them
be
like,
that
"Oh,
eventually.
we gotta go do the thing." If I'm general, I'd be like, hey, closest person I can see that I know I trust, take this person and have them go do a thing. But no, seriously, if I'm just a fencer, I'd be like, hey, Bob, new fencer, I see a hole forming over there. We should probably go and stop that. Come with me. Come with me if you want to die. Wait.
Perfect. That's definitely how
Die gloriously.
Beautiful. So we got to kind of arrange there. We got setting people up for success in melee by communicating what melee is about and not about, which is objective, which came up in everyone's answer. We got the ask leading questions to figure out what they're comfortable with, to figure out which unit to send them with on the melee field before lay on. And we got, hey, come with me if you want to die gloriously, which is how I got hooked. So that's amazing and wonderful. But sometimes people are surprising. Sometimes they are not as comfortable as they may seem, because many fencers have what we like to call the ego. So how would you... yeah, I know.
Except that we have egos? I don't know what you're talking about.
I've never seen an ego.
I feel called out.
Well, so this is
My hair's better, Connor.
Ooh.
It is more floofy. Mine has a lot more gray.
Oh, yeah, Mirabai's got a speed. Actually, Alora and Mirabai both have a speed.
Yeah.
They got the red. That's...
All right. So I guess my next question, and I totally led in with that, and I should have totally expected pushback because there are definitely not any egos on this panel. But how do you assess your new person's comfort level prior to and in a melee? Because what they say they're comfortable doing versus what you see in a small practice versus what you might see on the Gulf Wars, Estrella, or Pennsic field can be very different. And Connor, you kind of led into this a little bit with talking to them about their objective and asking where they were comfortable and using that as the middle ground. How do you encourage them to push their boundaries or rein it back a little bit if they like to jump at people screaming, die, or whatever? So that's the question. How do you assess your new person's comfort level, and how do you evaluate it on the fly? I'm going to start with you, Connor, because you had the leading questions and you kind of led us into this question.
Well, number one, don't be on the front line when you're trying to work with them. One of the things that I always do so usually just my side, is I don't yell commands to my fighters. I walk behind them and I speak to them in a normal speaking voice. So if I need them to do something, that way I can, but I always call them by name, right? So you have to know their names. Don't just be like, blue fighters to me. You have to use their name to get their attention first. And you have to use their name first, right? Don't give a command, then give the name. Use their name and let them know that you're there. But I've done this many times where I walk up to someone where I'm like, okay, see that person's leg? Take it. Give me that leg, And then as soon as they do that, I congratulate them and I move on, right? But I walk behind all of them and I give them little pieces to do something, and then I leave, right? Now, if I have my way, I leave so I can go behind the other line and give them commands too. But that's a totally different game we're playing now.
That one's a common theme for just about any general or commander. You guys can't see it, but we have a private chat, and there's been a little bit of that going back and forth. My question to you, Connor, is once you give them those little tidbits, have you ever had to adjust on the fly? Have you ever?
Always.
Okay.
Every hour, every minute, you have to adjust on the fly. But part of being that person is if you're not on the front line, you can see a lot more things, right? You have to stay behind and see, because it usually ends up in a line. And what usually happens is people are just doing tink, tink, tinks, but then you can point out to someone, it's like, see that person's knee? Take his knee, take his knee. And you can say it in this voice. And then as soon as they do it, they're hooked. Because as soon as they do the one thing you told them to do and they get it, they have a story. They have to walk away with a story.
So, yeah, no, I'm seeing how I got played. I'm seeing why I'm here over 10 years later, and I'm cringing a little on the inside. My question for you is, I'm going to play DM for a moment, but if you see that someone's uncomfortable with that little action that you're giving them or just can't quite do it, how would you adjust?
Again, it comes back to talking to them, and then you have to gauge how someone feels, and it's not just by their words, but it's how their actions and what they're trying to do. And if they aren't comfortable with certain things, and even if they die in the failure of it, maybe they get pezzed in the head as they try and go for that kneecap. You always point out you were so close, you almost had that, but you did the right thing when you did this thing. And then ask them what they think they could have done better. Ask them what they saw. Ask them if they saw what you were seeing. Because even if they can't do the action, if they could see what you're trying to convey, that's equally a win.
Perfect. Thank you.
I don't know what you mean by getting played. It's not like I ever did that to you.
Never, ever. No, and I heard the little voice and I was like, oh yeah, let's go kill something. And then I went, oh, lizard brain down. No melees for a while. Definitely not after being made an honorary Atlantean. So, perfect. Thank you very much. That is where I wanted to go with that. So no pressure to my other two panelists. I'm going to jump over to Mirabai next. How do you assess a noob's comfort level prior to and in a melee? And how do you push their boundaries or rein them back depending on how they're reacting?
A lot of it comes down to communication, which, as I'm sure you remember from me being general, is like the point that I drive home every second that I can. Just watching somebody's behavior, not just what they're saying, because sometimes you can ask somebody like, hey, you doing okay? Oh yeah, I'm fine. And if you watch their body language and their actions, they're not fine. So just communicating and trying to get to know fighters. That's one of the reasons I really appreciate that we have a lot of regional practices before we go to war, because it gives me a chance to get to know people at least a little bit and see how they normally fight, so I can judge, are they actually okay, or do they need some help? Do they need to take a break? Do they need a different objective? Do they need to be buddied up with somebody? So communication and talking to them. And if I don't know them well, but I know someone who knows them well, I'll be like, hey, can you go check on so-and-so? They look like they might be having a rough time. Just go check on them, make sure they're okay, see if they want to go with you for the next run.
So my question for you, to pry a little deeper in what you just said, is you said that sometimes their actions are a little bit different than their words. What type of actions are you looking for? What type of reaction are you looking for when you have that moment before you go talk to their friend?
It really depends on the person. Like, some people are typically very emotive, and when they're not doing okay, they'll suddenly get very quiet, or their faces will be very deadpan, and you can be like, okay, they're overwhelmed. Something needs to change. Something needs to help them. Or some people will get really twitchy, and you can see them like bouncing on the balls of their feet, and it's kind of hard to describe. It's not excited. It's like, I don't know. It's anxiety, and you can just see it in the stance of their body. So it really depends on the person, but usually it's however they typically are when they're happy and they're doing fine and they're enjoying themselves, it shifts to the opposite. So if you know them, or if you've observed them fighting before, you can usually tell when something's going on.
Perfect. That is, I wanted to dive a little deeper in that, just for people who are newer to either coaching or evaluating people in the melee field, and just joining us to figure out how to treat their new people a little bit better. So thank you, Mirabai. Alora, last but not least, how do you assess your new people's comfort level?
I think the big thing is to remember that even people without egos have egos and adrenaline rushes. And so asking them on the field, how are you doing? You're going to get the, I'm fine. Where their eyes look like cartoon characters and they're vibrating and they're bouncing off around. And then, you turn around, like Mirabai said, and they're not there. I think also recognizing that you can't see everybody, you can't know everybody. So as, the general of an army, you're really reliant on and going to benefit from having sub-commanders. So having those people who, are watching their 5 people or their 20 people or, their 3 people, depending on the size of your war, to have that gauge, that connection on where they are, because, even standing at the back, you still can't see everything. I mean, I remember one particular war where it was like, okay, the commander's like, okay, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to do this, these guys are doing that, and they're watching, and the commander's watching, and then all of a sudden there was, a group of us in reserve, and we're like, we're never mind, we'll go take care of this. So you need that group effort to strive for your objective, but also that connection in that group effort to watch out for the other people, to help guide them, and recognize that at that moment they may not know how they are, so they may not be able to give you that answer.
Perfect. And I think that's a really important consideration for people who are new or even experienced to coaching, is sometimes people don't know how to do self-reflection, especially in the heat of melee or practices. Adrenaline is a real thing, and competitive spirit is a real thing. Definitely not guilty of that. All right, so this kind of leads me into the next question, because we've heard a little bit about just not quite being there 100% mentally on the melee field and at practices. So one of the most important aspects to what we do with so many people and so many sharp, pointy things that aren't really sharp is safety. Safety is of the utmost concern for us so that we can keep doing whatever we're doing for the next 20 plus years. So how do you effectively assess a noob's safety level in a melee? And when their comfort level dips low enough that they are no longer safe, how do you encourage them not to overdo it and help them internalize that message for later? So that's a big question. I apologize in advance, but I'm going to start with you, Mirabai, since you have the KRM in your house. I know, I'm sorry.
So what I tell people when I'm training them is we're fighting our friends. Our goal is to have them come back and fight us again.
Mm-hmm.
If they don't come back, we don't have a game. So if I see somebody who's being unsafe, either for themselves or for others, I will say, you know, hey, you need to go take a 2-minute break. I'll see you back here in 2 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Which again is totally my teacher voice. You need to go out in the hall for a couple minutes. I'll see you in a couple minutes. If I see that they are being unsafe for themselves, but not for others, like I can see that they're getting overheated or they haven't gone to take a water break in a while, if I'm not needed on the field in that minute, I will say, hey, I'm going to go take a break. You come with me. Because, sorry, this sounds kind of egotistical, but like if I'm doing it, then it's okay.
Mm.
Like, you know what I mean? Like a noob might feel like, oh, I need to be out here for the whole 45-minute res battle unless I get killed. I'm going to go take a break. Come with me. If it's someone that I have not trained who doesn't know me, that can be harder because who are you and why should I listen to you? But I usually try to kind of use that voice that Connor was talking about using for commands, where I'm not yelling at them. I'm being calm. Like, hey, those last 2 shots were excessive. You need to go take a break for a minute.
Mm-hmm.
And if they blow me off, I will usually go have a quiet word with the marshal and ask the marshal to go ask them to take a break. It's not okay either for themselves or for anybody else on that field if they're being unsafe. And our goal is to have everybody want to come back and do it again.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you for that insight. I am going to jump over to Alora next and ask the same question. How do you evaluate your new person's safety, and how do you help them be safer when things kind of get a little bit shaky? Because we've all been new and muscle memory is a thing. So,
especially when you haven't built up any yet.
mm-hmm.
I think one of the really good quotes that, you know, I've heard somebody say to me and lots of people several times, we're here to kill our friends, not hurt them. That reminder that as much as we want to win, it's their safety. You know, in armored combat, you rely on the armor to protect the person. Mm-hmm. And in rapier combat, we rely on the other person to protect us. And so I think pointing out that responsibility to them, hey, you're responsible for making sure that your opponents are safe. And I haven't seen you take a drink in a while. You know, maybe having a drink and make sure you're hydrated is going to be the best thing to take care of yourself and your friends right now. And again, encouraging them to make that right decision. saying, hey, you know, I noticed you were super excited, or somebody was training you on that thing and you didn't take that break on that last run. Maybe you should have a drink, you know, on this break. Like Connor said, give them the chance to make the right choice, but that they're making it so that they can be proud of it and they can be invested in it and it can become their story.
No, and I think that's a wonderful way to look at both being effective on the melee field and being safe on the melee field. I want to delve just a little bit deeper because, and I apologize, the lizard's water is going off, if you can hear that in the background. I want to delve a little bit deeper on training because both you and Mirabai touched on what happens on the melee field when things start getting a little bit spicy. What can we do in our practices to also evaluate and internalize training for safety specifically? And Alora, I'm deep diving with you now.
I'm not sure how to answer that. Yeah, I'm gonna.
No pressure. I can jump away and then come back, and I can make Connor answer this. I can make Mirabai answer this, and then. Uh-oh, she's frozen again.
I want to freeze.
Oh,
I asked such a scary question. I'm so sorry.
You scared her camera.
I scared her camera. Oh. I had that problem with my own camera and all those mirrors cracking in our bathroom, but like, I'm so sorry.
That's because Trap is.
well, we'll get Connor and Mirabai's answer just in time for her to come back.
Yeah, that's true.
All right, Connor.
Okay, quick. What? 5 words. What was the question?
Oh my God! No, you're doing what I do our panelists. How do you assess a noob's safety? Not in the midst of melee, at practice.
So, one of the things that I do, and is when I'm trying to test that, I actually do throw things at them that are illegal, and I want to see how they react to it. I don't necessarily try and hit hard. I don't ever want to do anything that's going to hurt them, but I do want to do things that will scare them, so I can see what they're going to do, and then I talk to them about it and see how that is. Because at practice, if everything goes perfectly, there's never an issue. I need to see how they would react if something doesn't go perfectly. Mm-hmm. And if someone does, like, for example, grabbing their blade, right? Some places allow it, some places don't. What happens when someone grabs their blade? Are they going to totally freak out? You know, stuff like that. Do little things that are illegal and then let them know why you were doing it. But you always have to talk with them afterwards to let them know that you're not just being a douche.
Perfect. And that helps me a lot lead into my follow-up to you, which is what do you do in what do you do in the heat of battle when you see them reacting poorly to crazy shit happening on the field, or when they possibly do crazy shit on the field?
Depends on how egregious it is. If it's one of those that has caused a hold, then I want to say that I let the marshals deal with it, but it doesn't always work that way. But if it's something that I see is completely, like, maybe they did something really crazy that they got away with, you know, then I want to point out why that would have been bad and how horrible that could have gone. Especially, like, I've seen people rush someone down, and I have to point out to them, it's like, look at what you almost ran them into. You know, I've had to do stuff like that. But at the same time, you also have to see what's really going on. Did they actually do something crazy, or did they trip? Right? And it's one of those things that you have to observe what's going on too. You can't just when you're commanding, you can't just be in your own fight. You have to be watching everyone else's too. One of the things that, and Wistric knows this because we do this all the time in Atlantia, is that our fighters, even if we're fighting, we're still marshaling. You know, we still have to see what's going on everywhere, not just in our personal fight. We have to see what's going on with everything else. And that's one of the things that we train most of our guys to do is marshal while you're fighting too. Because everyone can call hold.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone can tell someone, hey, don't step into that. Hey, there's a big stump there. Watch your footing. Stuff like that.
And Atlantia does like to play in the woods. So that's always lots of 1 foot long broken off branches sticking out right behind the person who's retreating away from you.
Yeah.
So I guess that's kind of my question is, how do you train your people to keep that eye out? How do you teach them that anyone can call hold? Because I noticed this with a lot of the new people in our area. They're very nervous to rock the boat, and hold, especially in a big scale melee, such as at Pennsic or Gulf Wars, can mean like 300, 400 people having to stop. How do you confirm that that's okay, that that's actually a part of our game and actually very important?
In the practice,
Mm-hmm.
break a rule, grab their blade, hold on to it till they say hold, and then remind them that they should, and that it's their job to say hold. Also encourage people to become marshals, and they don't, because once you become a marshal, you're gonna marshal pretty much all the friggin' time. You don't just turn it off when you're fighting, but you will find that the people that only fight, they don't always do this, but every marshal is always a marshal.
Okay, so I'm gonna do a very quick speed round here because Wistric has a wonderful follow-up to Connor's break the rules on them until they tell you to stop. How do we train new fighters to be safe in melee at practice? Connor had a great suggestion in encouraging them to become marshals in breaking the rules until they say stop. But Mirabai, how do you train new fighters to be safe in melee at practice? What are some of the top 3 things you point out?
It's hard to say because honestly I have done what Connor said, where you break the rules until they call you on it. The other is, if we're doing small scale melee games, if I call a hold or if someone else calls a hold, I will call on the noob and be like, why did we call a hold? What was that for? Mm-hmm. What did you see? And the third one is just, we call holds when we feel it's unsafe. So anytime you feel unsafe, you call a hold. And then when they call a hold, instead of being like, what the hell are you calling a hold for? You're like, okay, hey, what was making you feel unsafe? What did you see? What was somebody doing?
Mm-hmm. Have you ever had it backfire on you in asking them why a hold was called? Did that ever make them nervous or anything like that? And how did you handle that if that was the case?
Yeah, there have been a few times where people said, like, I have no idea. I honestly didn't see it. I was looking somewhere else. And it's like, that's okay. We can't be looking everywhere at once. But situational awareness is part of that. So here's what was happening. And then I tell them what was happening and why the hold was called. And they're like, oh, okay, I'll look for that next time. So giving them that kind of, I don't know, bridge to get to where they see things happening.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I'm going to jump over to Alora and ask the same thing. How do you train people to be safe at practice in respect to melee?
I think it's a combination of the drills, creating that opportunity to go through the motions slowly and explain to them that it's like the footwork drills where you're building up that muscle memory. We're going to build up your reaction memory. We're going to slowly, okay, everybody's going to get together, but we're going to do this literally at half speed. So we're all gonna walk at half speed. We're all gonna fight at half speed. This is a learning experience, and then building up to the games. Mm-hmm. One of the other things that we'd done in the past was doing the melee scenarios without swords. Mm-hmm. And everybody just goes through, and you've got your sword, and you get your opponent, and so there's that. You take that extra step out of the thinking process. Especially I remember you know, watching new people and being there myself. You do the footwork drills, you do the hand drills, you practice, you've got this, you put your sword in your hand and you're like, irk. And you have that moment of, now what do I do? Even though it's the same thing you've just practiced, it's that same step on how can we break this down to give them the opportunity to build that proper muscle memory, that case of, you know, it's not just that one person in front of you, it's everybody in your zone. It's can that person reach you? And yeah, I think it's that opportunity to build those drills in and those fun things in and look at things in a different way before you leap in with both feet and you're on a literal field with however many other people and your sword and your shield and all the noise and the heat and the everything else.
Perfect. So I'm going to draw attention to a comment that was actually left for us by Mid-Roam's KRM, of all things, which is calibration, awareness, and being safe even when it's not advantageous, which is something that each one of our panelists has outlined in their answer to this. So I love you guys. Thank you so much for being fabulous. But I think I'd like to delve a little more into that last comment, which is being safe even when it's not advantageous, because it kind of draws all three things together that we've talked about, which is comfort, being effective on the melee field, and safety. So how do you convince a new person who might see the big W's in their eyes for win to be safe rather than throw it all away to get those kills? And Connor, I'm going to start with you.
Again, that sort of thing really depends on the person, right? So everyone is going to look at this very differently, and I'm going to stereotype for a second here. Like heavy fighters, going back to like the safety thing, right? Heavy fighters, when they come into rapier, they're used to the idea of letting their armor be the protection. As long as the opponent doesn't kill them and they kill you, it's a win, right? But you have to change the game slightly on them. And those a lot of those people also are the ones that tend to hit a little bit harder, right? So their calibration might be off. One of the phrases that I always do on that is, you are too good of a swordsman to be hitting people that hard, right? So you give the compliment to make them realize, oh shit, I dumb screwed up, right? So that is one of the big things that you can do. If the other person is prone to losing their temper, right? You have to look for the signs to figure out why they're going to lose their temper. Did they eat that day, right? So if you have to know what their triggers are, right? Are they prone to injury? Are they prone to trip on things? Most of the times I see someone do something that's unsafe, it's because they step poorly, right? It's usually a footwork thing. So there's so many different things, but you have to know what they're prone to screw up, and then you can address. And I think I totally blew past what you actually asked, but.
No, it touched on some of it, and it's going to let me kind of go somewhere else where we wanted to, which is talking. Bad touch. Which I wanted to talk about a little more, which were some of the body language and triggers for knowing when people are about to be unsafe, when people are about to throw out all of the things that we've talked about with safety and comfort for the win. So you talked about knowing your friends and knowing if they've eaten or knowing if they're injury prone. But what about Johnny Noob, who you've only met at practice once or twice and taken out to dinner maybe once or twice? How do you evaluate the situation to see when they're starting to spiral out of control? Connor.
Is that addressed at me or just anyone in general?
Anyone in general. So like, what are some of the body language triggers you're looking for if someone is about to lose their shit on the melee field? Wow, that was really much.
How long does it take for them to respond?
You
know, and you can look through the mask and see how their eyes are. We can look at body language, look at their sword. Is it starting to shake a little bit? That usually means they need water, right? So if they're holding it too tight, there's a lot of triggers that you can see. I mean, I do the same thing if I'm fighting single. If I see the other person's sword is doing this, I know that they're holding their sword really tight. I'm just going to blast it out of their hand, right? But if it's one of my guys, I know that they're holding it too tightly, and I'm going to tell them, hey, this is the point we need to take a break and do this other thing. Or you can sometimes give them a job that is completely different. I need you to run down to the other end and help save these guys. I got this here. You go. Right? So get them out of that situation.
Mm-hmm.
There's a whole bunch of things, but you have to, as a commander of whatever it is, you have to know what the triggers are for your army. And you have to know what it is for each individual, because that is different. And that is the job that every good commander should have.
And that's been kind of a key takeaway this evening, is know your fighters from Mirabai and the regional practices, and from Connor, know everyone personally, take them out to dinner, get to know them, use the salt shakers, demonstrate. And Alora, laughter at that second practice, and that's how you were hooked. So there's kind of a common theme here. I want to open it up to
Does
Alora.
that come back to where you got licked at one of your first things, and that's why you got hooked?
No, I'm pretty sure it's because Davius picked me up by the scruff and said, baby girl, we're going to go kill some things in the woods at Penzik. And that's when I got DFB turned off for Penzik, because I DFB'd the king of the mid-realm and his 2 heavy generals at the time.
Sweet.
He should have known better.
He didn't.
He shouldn't have let you in the backfield.
Yeah.
I thought he was my friend, too. That was the
You
worst
should have
part.
just told him, take it like a man, you know?
It was even worse than that. I thought it was my friend, so I came up behind him and I was like,
Did you snap it?
I used a really, really, I don't even remember what tagline I used, but I think it was something like...
Did you use one of Davius's? Like...
I might have. Yep, Davius told me exactly what to say. If it was my friend, if I knew them, this was fine. Mistakes were made, do not be like me. But I am going to open up this to Mirabai and Alora, which is, how do you know when someone is about to be super unsafe? And we touched on this a little bit with melee, on the melee field with Mirabai. So Mirabai, at practice, how can you tell when someone's about to start being unsafe, or when they've traded their decorum for the win? And how do you help them internalize that that's not how we do things? We don't want to break our friends.
It's hard to tell, because it's kind of a person by person basis. At practice, because I know everybody pretty well, usually I can see when they're starting to act outside their norms. They're taking shots they wouldn't normally take. They're starting in measure. They're just not being themselves as their normal fencing person. In larger melees, there's a few general signs I'll look for. Not intending to be sexist, but generally the body language varies by gender. Mm-hmm. With a lot of men or male presenting people, I'll see the shoulders start to rise up. That's the very like, come at me. And that's a very pre-hominid thing that happens, the like making yourself bigger. And so I'll see the shoulders start to go up, and I'll be like, hey, let's go take a break. With women, sometimes I find it harder because it varies a lot more. Sometimes it's, you start to notice them not taking shots that they could have taken. You start to notice them missing steps or stumbling. Mm-hmm. Or looking around a lot, like they're not quite sure what's happening. That's a sure sign of, hey, you need to go take a break. Something unsafe is going to happen here. You're not quite yourself right now.
The one I look for is actually the shoulder drop and the kind of schlump, especially in female and female presenting people. It gets really easy to see when someone's deflated, but I don't usually find that they're going to be unsafe. That's the water break moment for me as well.
Yeah, and I also tend to find that for a lot of men, they become more aggressive as they're not sure what's going on. It's like a defensive thing. And for women, they become less aggressive and drop back and try to figure out what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. And it's very interesting to see that reaction and to see where it's about to explode, but I'd like to prevent it some more. Right? All right, I'm going to jump.
It's interesting anthropologically, but not
right
when it's your friends on
right
the melee field.
Yeah, again, rule number 1 is we want our friends to come back and play with us again, so let's not hurt them. You can kill your friends, just don't hurt your friends.
Jumping to Alora, just can we go a little more in depth into the body language you look for when people are either uncomfortable or about to be unsafe, since they're kind of intertwined?
Yeah, I think it's also a lot of case of teaching that self-awareness right at the beginning, making safety, personal safety, your opponent's safety, an integral part of the training right from the beginning, making it just as emphasizing how important it is, just like your footwork, just like your blade position, just like your stringere, just like your, and truly teaching that self-awareness and that perceptual awareness of your opponent from the beginning. Because again, you can't see everyone. But if you've trained all the people at your practice, and if all the people you've interacted, you've ingrained that in them as well, now suddenly you have everybody's eyes watching everybody. So, I go to, face off against somebody and I watch them and their sword drops. And their sword drops. And their sword drops. It's now ingrained in me that, hey, I need to be aware of not just their safety in the shots I throw, but what are they going to do? So again, I guess if you're looking specifically for that body language, for me, I noticed that breath holding, because you're holding it all in, and then you can't take it anymore. And I find that that's more of a giveaway with new people, regardless of gender, because they haven't built up that stamina, that muscle memory, as much as more experienced fighters. But I think having that all eyes on everybody is going to be your big saver of safety issues. However, I've been on enough war fields to know that even your most diehard guys can run into somebody else who's got their back up at the wrong moment, and it's suddenly a yard sale with helmets flying and people needing timeouts and things.
So yes.
And got the knowing nod, Wistric.
Yep. Hey, Wistric, you got something to add?
No.
Are you saving it for the There Was stories?
I'm saving it for when the recording isn't happening.
No. Oh, that's how you know it's good.
Yeah.
So we've talked a little bit about emergency interventions if people are getting unsafe or uncomfortable, etc. And we've talked a little bit about what makes melee so addicting, the enjoyment and the camaraderie on and off of the field, whether it's partying at golf floors or going out to dinner after, or just a really fucking fun practice. But I think the next thing I want to ask has to do with becoming a better fencer, becoming a better melee fighter. Would you ever give a new person advice mid-melee, whether it's in between rounds or while you're getting water, on how to be more effective? And if you would, how would you communicate it without being belittling or taking the wind out of their sails? Connor kind of touched on this a little bit in, even if they didn't succeed in his objective that he gave them, that he'd still cheer for them and be like, you were this close, next time, next time. But how could you, or would you ever communicate how to change it up? So I'm going to start with you, Connor, since that was kind of part of your spiel that led to this question. And then I'm going to jump to the other two. So
always ask if they want advice. Don't give unsolicited advice. The other trick is to ask them if there's advice they have for you, because then that'll open them up for advice from you. But you never say, you could do this and this will make you more effective. Just be like, how's it working for you out there? You know, and let them see some stuff. And it's like, oh, is there something that could be better? Do you want a different job? Let me know. I'll give you a different job. You know, stuff like that. But always ask and let it be their idea.
Perfect. Alora?
Same thing, really. The number of times I've had, and I think this is partly being a, less than super tall woman, is I've had so many people come up to me and be like, hey, so I've got this advice for you. And I'm like, not right now, thanks. This is not the time. But it took me a long time to get to be able to say, no, thank you, not right now. So I think it's really important to have that moment of, hey, I've watched you do this amazing thing, and, I'm inspired, and I've got this great idea. Is this a good time to talk to you about it?
Mm-hmm.
But also preface it with what you want to talk about. Because if somebody just comes up and goes, hey, is this a good time to talk about something? I'm going to automatically be like, no, whatever it is, no. Doesn't matter what it is, no. So, give them, like Connor said, give them that positivity that, hey, I saw this amazing thing and I've been inspired to tell you this other thing. And hey, I was watching this melee and I have this amazing idea for how to countermand their flanking maneuver. Would you be interested in joining me on that? Preface it as a way for them to grow rather than a lecture.
Right. So what I'm kind of hearing is to A, ask. When in doubt, always ask. But B, divert their attention in some way to make it more their idea than your idea. Plant the seed of the idea in their head before redirecting. Is that kind of what I'm taking away from this, Alora?
Not necessarily that has to be their idea, but that they're engaged in it. Mm-hmm. Even if, like, for example, like I said, you say, oh, hey, I watched this flanking thing and I've got this great idea to countermand that, but I can't do that by myself. Are you interested in joining me? Have that engagement, whether it's them coming up with the idea themselves, you leading them to it, or just asking them to come along for the ride.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Mirabai, last but not least, how do you give new people advice mid-melee?
So the short answer is I don't unless they ask. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes new people in a melee are already so overwhelmed that their filters are so high they're not going to understand anything I tell them anyway. Mm-hmm. And that, again, teaching background, affective filters are a thing. If your stress levels are high enough, good or bad stress, you literally can't learn anything. So if they ask, then I will tell them. And it's likely they won't learn it then either, and I'll repeat it later. But if they ask, I will give advice. If they're doing something that is, well, we already talked about what to do if they're unsafe. But if they're doing something that's not really going to lead to them completing an objective or doing what we need them to do, sometimes I will try to do sort of the sandwich of, hey, I saw you doing X and it was really cool, but then I saw Y and that wasn't really very helpful. So maybe you could try X, Y, and Z. Mm-hmm. Like that kind of like, here's a good thing, here's a bad thing, here's what you can do about it.
No, and I think that's excellent advice for anyone who is coaching or teaching, whether it's melee or singles. I think my next question, which I think I just totally lost into the ADHD ethos. I
It'll come back.
Yeah, it will. It'll come back in 2 hours, and I sit straight up in bed and be like, shit, that's what I was going to ask. So I guess my next question would be, how can we, there it is. How can we encourage new people to ask for advice? I know when I was newer, I was hungry for all the information, but I just wanted to do it again. I just wanted to spar again. I just wanted to roll around on the floor and do things that were totally illegal for SCA fencing, but so much fun again. I kept coming at it like, I don't know, like a kid on a roller coaster. But how can we teach newer people how to ask for advice, especially coming into the situation where people are learning that unsolicited advice is not the best way to teach? How can we make them more comfortable, and how can we teach them what questions to ask to get our best from them? Or is there a way? You could just tell me, Bruce, I don't know. I have no idea. You're asking for magic and unicorns. But how can we teach people how to ask the right questions? I'm going to start with Mirabai.
Of course you are.
I know. The most open-ended question. Let me give you the shittiest one.
Thanks. So part of how I teach the people that are local to me to ask questions is I will just directly say, hey, if you have any questions, let me know. Like, even if you think it's a stupid question, even if you think it's obvious, ask. Because if you don't ask, you don't know. Mm-hmm. It's harder when it's people I don't know, or when it's newer people going to large events, because I remember being that new fighter, and the only people I was really willing to talk to were the people that I knew from my local group, even though I knew there was a lot to learn from other people, and that's really tricky. I think in sparring, if we tell our new people that they can always say to somebody at the start of sparring with someone, like, hey, I'm looking for advice about X, so can you watch for that and let me know what you see? That can be really helpful, because as a more experienced fencer, if I go out to spar with somebody and I don't know that they're working on something in particular, or that they're looking for something in particular, I don't know to give that feedback to them. So we often teach our newer fencers to ask. In melee, it can be tricky, because there's so much going on that sometimes the newer fencers end up with 50 questions and they don't really know how to put any of them into words, or how to get the information that they want. So that one I don't really have an answer for.
No, and that's absolutely acceptable, because we're not going to cure cancer and solve world hunger on this call, but it's stuff to think about, especially because there has been such a swing towards teaching people how to ask questions and what to look for in the sparring field, and maybe we can move that into melee.
The other thing, sorry, I just thought about, also, it's really good for the more experienced fencers to know who to ask if we're not the experts on something. Mm-hmm. So there have been times where I've had a newer fencer come up to me and be like, hey, I have this question, and they give me the question. I'm like, I don't know that much about that, but so-and-so does. How about I introduce you to them? So I think that's part of our job, is to connect the newer fencers to people who can help them if we're not the best person to help them with it.
No, and that's absolutely understandable, and something that I really try to live by as well, as my little Rolodex of people. All right, Alora, you're next. How can we teach new people to ask the right questions?
I think that part of it is that repetition, that saying that you don't learn something until you've heard it 7 times. It's the reason why at the beginning of every scenario, the marshals come up and remind everybody what the scenario is, even though it's in the printed copy, and we went over it at the beginning of the war. This scenario, we're doing this. And remember that if you have a question, chances are so do other people, so somebody should come up and ask. It's also about how we answer it, how we answer questions when people do come up. When you've got that new person who does come out of their shell and they come up to you and they're like, oh, all right, and then they blurt out their question. And it's probably going to be awkward and confusing, and how you answer it is just as critical. Because if the first time they've come up to somebody and they've, worked up the courage and they're gonna, the marshal's been saying every scenario that if you've got a question to come out and ask, and okay, and I'm gonna come out and ask, and they're like, I don't understand what a DFB is, and you're like, we just fucking explained that 7 times. How do you not know what this is? Done. That person is not going to ask the question again.
That's actually one that's very personal to my heart. And I know people like to roll their eyes at me, but when we were running war camps here in the Mid-Realm, I make myself big and stupid and ask how to do a DFB every fucking time. And I know it irks some people because we have explained this at every war camp and we explain this nearly every scenario, but I want to teach people that there is no such thing as a stupid question, even if there are definitely stupid questions and we're all melting and you should have read the scenario and the rules in the first place. But it's better to get clarification before going out on the field and doing something unsafe. So I want to throw in my 2 cents there because I super agree with you on that one. So thank you, Alora. Connor, last but not least, how?
My big thing is lead by example. So when you're about to when you want to give someone advice, ask them what they could advise you. Like, I'll always end it with, I'll be the first one to say, so how did you beat me when you did X or Y? Like, what did you see when you hit me there? And then I get them to advise me, to tell me what they saw and all of that. And I ask all the questions that I want them to ask me because they will.
I remember you doing that to me, and you're the person I learned that from, honestly.
And I learned it from Master Joffrey. Right? So it is the quickest and easiest way to do it. Ask them the questions you want them to ask you. And after you have that, you can do that. Also, being kind of the crazy, outgoing, gregarious person, people are more easily able to talk to me about things, right? And me being the one that always gets in trouble for whatever I did, people will always ask me, well, how'd you get out of trouble? Mm-hmm. Right? So there's a reason there's a method to my madness.
Yep.
So.
Yep. I like I said with Alora, there's a reason I make myself dumb, and I know I make a lot of people roll their eyes and get very upset with me, but I'd rather sit there and play dumb and then have someone be unsafe on my field.
The one thing I would suggest for you to, in those sorts of things, convince someone else to ask those questions. To be that person that just have someone else, maybe not necessarily the new person, but if you know that there's some sort of question, if you know that there's a question brewing, have someone else ask that question. You shouldn't be the one to do that because someone else needs to take over the job when it's not you.
Yep. Nope. And that is definitely something we've been working on here and proving that it's okay not to look like the smartest person in the room all the time. We're back to egos, full circle. All right. So that really kind of wraps up what I wanted to talk about when it comes to changing someone's direction, especially a new person in the middle of melee. It's very hard when you are new to be flexible and not take everything personally. It's also really hard to sometimes comprehend everything that's happening because, as so many of our first time stories said, it happens so fast. Like, you got there, big buildup, and then it was over in 30 seconds.
Why does it always come back to sex with you?
Is that what this is? I'm sorry. Wistric's the one who wrote "How was your first time?" I'm just going along for the ride.
Your 30-second ride with
My
Wistric?
30-second
Is
ride.
that what you're saying?
Very, very sweaty and disappointing.
In my defense, I wrote a lot more than how was your first time.
Yeah, you did.
I
In your defense,
fell
no, this
back.
is supposed to be my
Like,
defense.
this is what she's focused on.
You know, Freud was right. I'm just angry I don't have the penis. All right. Sorry.
You want a penis? We can get you a penis. It is
I mean,
it's
it's
2021. You can have a
That,
penis
like-
if you want one.
You can get a peek in it,
Anytime
then you
you
can
want.
stand. Then you can be standing up.
You
It-
can,
That's
you can
really the
order
most
it on
useful.
Amazon.
no,
That's the best
no.
use of it.
My
I don't know what your Christmas presents be.
no,
Crap.
no. My stand-in schlong is 50 foot long and on a flatbed. We're good. All right. Now, back on track because we probably
Wait,
I don't think anyone's going to get back on track after you talked about a schlong on a flatbed.
Damn it! I have the perfect question though.
I hope you wrote it down because
It'll keep.
It won't keep.
Write it. Okay, write it down because.
Nope.
Oh,
Nope. This is our speed round. This is the last thing. It's so good. Wistric. Yeah, don't look at me in that project manager face. All right. You're on the side of the field. The gun has just gone off. What brief thing would you tell a noob immediately before their first melee? And not that it's hot, sweaty, and disappointing, and Bruce's schlong is on the side of the road on a 50-foot flatbed. 50-foot flatbed.
Flatbread?
It's always food and sex with me. I'm sorry.
sausage pizza
You say that like it's a bad thing.
or mushroom.
That's like the keys of life.
Right, exactly. See, I have basic human needs. All right, Connor, what is the one piece of brief advice you'd give to a Johnny noob you've never spoken to before?
Leg and leave, run away.
Leg and leave and run away. All right, Laura, what is the one piece of advice you'd give someone when the whistle has just gone off?
Find a buddy. Stick with your buddy.
I like that one too. Mirabai, what is the one piece of advice you'd tell a noob?
Stick with and res with your team.
There's a theme here. Either make them suffer and separate them from their team or stay with your team. You have two options. All right.
Or both. Why not both?
One of the other things that we also do to keep people calm down is if it's a resurrection battle, we tell them don't resurrect alone.
Yes.
That forces them to take a break. So sometimes we'll tell people, make sure you come back into the battle in not pairs, but threes. So they wait at resurrection point until they have a third person. That forces them to take a break.
No, I think that's actually a great piece of practical advice. And I may borrow that.
Not borrowing if you don't give it back.
Yoinks.
Okay,
I was going to say, I actually haven't heard that before.
bad poets borrow, good poets steal.
All right, Shakespeare.
What's funny is when you see the noobs at the res line, like doing the tippy toe, like happy dance, like, come on, guys, you got to res with me.
Yeah.
And then if you're an ornery old cuss like me, you walk slower. Stop, get some water, be like, I'll be right there.
Wait.
Heel turn.
All right.
It's true.
All right.
I wanted to say thank you guys. And I want to direct something at the audience real quick. If you have any questions, we're about to go into our No Shit There I Was portion of the evening. We will be posting the Zoom after show hangout on the Fighting the World page on Facebook and in the chat. And the password is Newbs, Newbs. Wow, I spelled. Yes. All right. So if you've been with us before, we like to conclude with a No Shit There I Was story. And since I stole Wistric's normal spiel, I'll let him introduce the story we'll be doing this evening. So Wistric, take it away.
All right. Panelists, what is the most badass thing you have seen a noob first melee, maybe their first few big melees? What's the most badass thing you've seen a noob do? Or for those of us who only remember our own timelines, what was the best thing you did when you were a noob? But talk about somebody else if you can.
All right.
Are you going to direct that to people or just?
No. Elora.
All right, I'll jump out. One, not my story, but one of the ones I really like was a war battle, and all of a sudden it's over. The one side's won, and the king walks on, and he's got a thrown weapons in his hand. Now, granted, this was an armored, but this is one of my favorite new person stories. And he's like, "Who threw this? Who threw this?" And this person comes out. Me? The king's like, "That was awesome! You totally killed me, and you killed my guys, and this was great." And she's like, "It's my second event." and he's like, "Well, you need to come with me because that was amazing, and I want to honor you." And that was the amazing thing, is that most of the people that tell that story aren't that woman. There's so many other people that have enjoyed telling that story. And they're like, "Yeah, there was this thing." And then she'll be like, "Oh yeah, that was me." And people are like, "That's right, that was you." Or, "Oh my gosh, that was you." But it's that's one of my favorite ones. I've been racking my brains about, one of my favorite rapier noob stories, but those tend to just be those amazingly giddy people at the end of the war that are just, "Oh my gosh, I just died, like, I don't even know how many times, and I didn't get to kill anybody, but I legged somebody once." And they're just so excited, and they're so enthusiastic, and they're so passionate about coming back and doing it again, that story never gets old, because it's the next new person and the next new person and the next new person that have that experience, that have that joy, that have that positive reinforcement in their moment, even if it was I didn't die for a shot. That is sort of my continuing, the never-ending story of Rapier Melee, is just that pure joy.
And what I love about the super excited noobs, new fighters, is sometimes they won't even talk about, like, you'll hear them say, "I killed 20 people." They may have rezzed 50 times, but what sticks with them is just that, like, I got to kill somebody, and it's beautiful.
Your story reminds me of the Lady Crotch Shot story. You know about Lady Crotch Shot, or is that just an Atlantia thing?
No, don't know that one.
So this isn't my new person story, but this is the same sort of thing. There was Archer that was out on the heavy field, and she was going out there, and she was just killing people left and right, but she kept hitting all the heavy fighters in the crotch, and people were like getting upset because they thought that she was aiming at their crotch, and like, "Who keeps hitting me in the crotch?" And like, "You got to be hitting me in the chest." And then they saw her and they're like, "Well, shit, she's actually hitting us at eye level." She was really, really short, and she got named Lady Crotch Shot. And I think to this day she's probably still called that. But she hit at least 5 people that day doing that. And she was like, "I'm trying to aim higher, but it's high level." So my favorite noob story, and I actually hate calling people noobs like that, but they had heard the "no shit there I was" stories, which draws people to the events. That we have so many of those, and every single one of them wants to have a story when they leave too. They want to have that story. Whether it's, "I just legged one person," but they kept hearing the stories of how certain people would always get behind the enemy lines and either run the entire line with DFB or get the other lines to walk into themselves or command them or what have you. So it became a game for a lot of our new fighters to see if they could sneak behind the lines and command the line. And there's this one kid that he got behind the enemy line and he just kept DFBing that person's commander, like every time. And to this day, he killed the commander like 3 times with the DFB, and he won't ever let me live it down.
Wait,
What?
which kid is that?
Austin? Kel's son?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he
Good
got
for him.
behind the line and he DFB'd me. And he would constantly come back. For the next 5 years, that was his story about how he was so proud of the fact he DFB'd me 3 times in a melee. I had to give him props because he did it. But still, 5 years for a friggin' story. But it was good for him.
All right. Mirabai, I know.
I don't have any particularly noob stories. I mean, I have some funny stories about things that happen with rapier people. Like my husband, Master Darius, the KRM, getting DFB'd by somebody from our own side, who's the wife of one of our mods. While he was wearing his like super go mid-realm armor.
Those are the best.
It was kind of amazing. But yeah, I can't think of, I'm sure I have stories. I recommended people for Dragon's Teeth for stories, which those of you not from mid-realm, Dragon's Teeth are like on the field, someone did something super awesome awards. Yeah, I'm blanking. I can't think of a single one.
It's okay.
No worries.
We
It's
like to hear stories. We get stories.
Yep.
There will always be more stories. We'll give you more booze and you can have more stories.
Yeah.
You know, on a week when you're not teaching summer school and dealing with a ton of kids. So
I got 3 whole days off before starting to teach summer school.
Does that include the weekend, or is that like a 5-day weekend?
No, like I had to teach on Monday. Like I had to go to work on Monday, and then I got Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then I'm teaching tomorrow.
we had perfect timing. I'm so sorry, but I'm so glad.
Nailed it.
It just is. It just is. Like this school year has been.
It
I
has
joked
been
at the
this
beginning of
year.
the year that if we had staff shirts for this year with like our logo on them or our motto on them, it would be 2020, 2021. It is what it is.
Well, since we don't have any questions from the audience, although your husband has pointed out that it was the most beautiful DFB, cleanest, nicest one he's ever had so far. But since we don't have any questions from the audience, I just wanted to say thank you guys for being here. Thank you to our audience for joining us this evening. We are almost on time, Wistric. We didn't go over 45 minutes. It's the end of the world. But I wanted to thank you all for your input, your insight, and I hope that some of our new coaches out there have a few more things in their toolboxes for dealing with newer fencers and helping them out on the melee field and at practices. And hopefully we can spread some more melee to more people so that I have more friends to play with. All right.
Soon we shall have wars, real wars again.
Real fake wars.
No fake wars. No
Have you
internet
seen
wars.
rapier fighting? The best way to keep that 6-foot distance?
Don't make wishes.
Spears.
Yes. Yes. Social distancing. Just walk around and stab people if they get too close.
Yeah, I violate that one way too often.
Yeah.
All right.
It's the Atlantean hug.
It's cool.
So I think with that, good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Good night. Night God, take us out.